There is a question that has echoed through the corridors of human history since the very beginning. A question so simple on the surface, and yet so weighty in its implications, that entire civilizations have been built or broken depending on how the men within them answered it. It is a question that was asked in a garden thousands of years ago, and it is a question that still needs to be asked today. In our homes, in our communities, in the hearts of every male who walks this earth. The question is this: where are you? When God walked through the garden and called out to Adam, he was not asking a geographical question. God knew exactly where Adam was hiding. He was asking a question of accountability, a question of character, a question of identity. He was essentially saying, Adam, I gave you a garden to tend. I gave you a woman to love and protect. I gave you a purpose and a calling and a responsibility. And in the moment of your greatest test, where are you? Are you standing where you are supposed to stand? Are you being what you were made to be? Are you showing up as the man I created you to become? And if God were to walk through the gardens of our modern world today, into our homes, into our workplaces, into our communities, into the spaces where men are supposed to be standing and leading and building and protecting and guiding, he would ask the same question. Where are you? Not where are you physically, but where are you in terms of the man you are supposed to be? Where are you in terms of your character, your values, your purpose, your responsibility? Where are you in terms of what the world needs from you and what the people in your life deserve from you? And this is why this conversation matters so deeply. Not because men are superior to women, not because men have no challenges or struggles of their own, but because there is a crisis happening right now. A quiet, devastating, widespread crisis of male identity and male purpose that nobody is talking about loudly enough. We have spent years, rightfully so, empowering women, raising the confidence of the girl child, celebrating female achievement, building platforms for women to rise, and women have risen, beautifully and powerfully. But in the process, somewhere along the way, we forgot to do the same work for men. We forgot to teach men who they are. We forgot to equip them with the understanding of what real manhood looks like. We forgot to challenge them to become something worthy of the women we were raising. And so today we find ourselves in a situation where we have rooms full of prepared, purpose-driven, spiritually mature, professionally accomplished women, and not nearly enough men who are ready to stand beside them. Not nearly enough men who have done the inner work. Not nearly enough men who understand that being a male is simply a biological fact, but being a man is an intentional daily choice. Being a male is determined at birth. Being a man is determined by every decision you make from that point forward. So today we are going to talk about what a real man actually looks like. Not according to culture, because culture has gotten this badly wrong. Not according to the movies, which have given men a completely distorted picture of masculinity built on dominance, silence, and the suppression of everything real. Not according to the street, which defines manhood by money and physical strength and sexual conquest, but according to something deeper, something truer, something that has stood the test of time. We are going to talk about the 10 characteristics of a real man, and I want you to listen not to judge anyone else but to examine yourself. Not to feel condemned but to be challenged. Not to feel defeated but to be inspired toward the man you are fully capable of becoming. Number 1. A real man is a God lover. This is where it starts. This is the foundation on which everything else is built. And I know that in a world that celebrates a certain kind of tough, emotionless, self-sufficient masculinity, this might sound strange or even weak to some ears. But let me tell you something. There is nothing weak about a man who loves God. There is nothing shameful about a man who worships with his whole heart. There is nothing old-fashioned or effeminate about a man who is not ashamed to let the world know exactly who he serves and exactly where his strength comes from. Think about David, one of the most celebrated men in the entire Bible. A warrior king, a man who killed lions and bears with his bare hands. A man who walked onto a battlefield as a boy and took down a giant that an entire army was too afraid to face. A man whose name is still spoken with reverence thousands of years after his death. And what was David's most defining characteristic? It was not his military skill. It was not his political genius. It was not even his extraordinary courage in battle. It was his heart for God. He danced before God with everything he had. He poured out his worship with total abandon. He wrote songs of love and devotion and gratitude that fill the pages of the most widely read book in human history. He was not ashamed of his God. He was not embarrassed by his faith. He was not performing worship reluctantly on the outside while being somewhere else on the inside. He was fully present, fully devoted, fully in love with the God who had made him and called him and sustained him. And here is the truth about a man who truly loves God. His identity is not shaken by circumstances. When a man's sense of self is rooted in his relationship with his Creator, he does not need external validation to feel like a man. He does not crumble when his finances are challenged. He does not lose himself when his career takes a hit. He does not become someone else when the pressures of life increase. Because his foundation is not built on sand, it is built on rock. And that kind of stability, that kind of unshakable inner groundedness, is one of the most attractive and most powerful things a man can possess. Look at the gatherings in churches around the world. Look at the prayer meetings. Look at the worship services. And too often what you see is women filling the seats and men standing at the back or not showing up at all. As if loving God and expressing that love openly is something women do and men endure. As if worship is a feminine activity and men are just there to observe. And this is one of the greatest deceptions that the enemy has planted in the hearts of men. Because a man who is disconnected from God is a man who is operating without his power source. He is trying to run an engine without fuel. He is trying to build a house without a foundation. And eventually, inevitably, things will begin to fall apart. A real man is not ashamed of his faith. He is not too cool to be seen worshiping. He is not too proud to bow his knee. He understands that his insufficiency without his Creator is not weakness. It is wisdom. It is the beginning of true strength. Because the man who knows where his strength comes from never runs out of it. Number 2, a real man is a man of vision. You cannot lead people to a destination you cannot see. You cannot build a life without a blueprint. You cannot call yourself a man and have no direction, no plan, no sense of where you're going and why. Vision is not optional for a man. It is essential. It is one of the core responsibilities of manhood, and the absence of it is one of the greatest crises facing men today. We are living in a generation full of visionary women and directionless men, and this is not a criticism of women. Women rising into their purpose and vision is a beautiful thing, but it reveals a gap. It reveals that something is missing on the male side. And one of the consequences of that gap is that women who are designed to be supported and guided in partnership with a visionary man are being left to carry the entire weight of direction alone. And that is not what they were made to carry alone. Here is something that every man needs to understand about a woman. A woman needs something to connect to. She needs direction. She needs a vision she can get behind, contribute to, and help build. Not because she is incapable of creating her own, but because by design, by the very nature of how women are wired, they flourish when they are partnering with a man who knows where he is going. When a man does not provide that direction, a woman will eventually find direction somewhere. She will either step into the leadership role herself, which was not her primary design, or she will look elsewhere for someone who can give her the vision she needs. Neither of those outcomes is what God intended. So let every man listening ask himself honestly, do I have a vision for my life? Not a vague wish or a daydream, a real, specific, faith-filled vision for where I'm going, what I am building, and why it matters. Do I have a vision for my family? For my finances? For my future? Am I a man who wakes up with purpose and direction? Or am I simply reacting to whatever each day brings? Because vision is what separates men who build from men who drift. And we have far too many drifting men in this generation. If you do not yet have a clear vision, that is not a condemnation. It is an invitation. It is an invitation to get alone with God and ask Him what He placed you on this earth to do. Because God does not create without purpose. Every man reading this was made with intention. You were not an accident. You were not a mistake. You were designed by the same God who created the universe with extraordinary intentionality and creative precision. And He placed something inside you, a gift, a calling, a unique assignment that the world needs. Your job is to find it, develop it, and pursue it with everything you have. Number 3, a real man understands and respects the equal value of women. This one needs to be said clearly and without apology. A real man does not believe that he is superior to a woman, and I understand that this challenges some deeply held cultural beliefs. In many African cultures, in many traditional communities around the world, there is a deeply embedded idea that men are inherently above women, that women exist to serve and submit and be silent, that a man who treats a woman as his equal is somehow diminishing his own manhood. And I want to say today with absolute clarity that this is not manhood. This is insecurity dressed up in cultural clothing. A man and a woman are of equal value, equal essence, and equal worth before God. There is no version of genuine Christian faith, no honest reading of Scripture, that supports the idea that one gender is superior to the other in terms of their worth as human beings. The Bible says in Galatians that there is neither male nor female in Christ Jesus, for we are all one. God did not create woman as a lesser version of man. He created her as a partner, a completer, an equal bearer of the divine image. And any man who cannot see and honor that truth has a software problem. His internal operating system has been corrupted by culture and tradition, and it needs to be updated by truth. Now here is where many people get confused, and this confusion causes enormous damage in marriages and relationships. The fact that men and women are equal in value does not mean they are identical in function. In the context of marriage, someone has to provide direction and leadership, not because men are smarter or more capable or more important, but because two people cannot drive the same car at the same time. When you have two drivers fighting for the steering wheel, you do not end up going faster. You end up in an accident. Somebody has to drive. And in the context of marriage, God assigned that responsibility to the husband, not as a privilege of superiority, but as a responsibility of servanthood. And this is the part that too many men miss entirely. Leadership in the home, biblical leadership, is not domination. It is not control. It is not the right to override your wife's opinion or silence her voice or dismiss her wisdom. Biblical leadership is servanthood. It is the willingness to carry more, to sacrifice more, to pour yourself out in service of the people in your care. Jesus, who is the model of true leadership, did not sit on a throne and demand to be served. He got on his knees and washed feet, and he said that the greatest among you shall be your servant. That is the model of male leadership. Not a king who demands submission, but a servant who earns it through consistent, sacrificial, genuine love. So a real man does not suppress his wife. He elevates her. He does not silence her voice. He creates a safe space for her to speak. He does not dismiss her wisdom. He is wise enough to recognize it as one of the greatest assets in his life. And when he does these things, when he truly leads by serving, he will find that he does not need to demand respect or submission. Both will flow naturally toward him from a woman who knows she is deeply loved, genuinely valued, and truly safe. Number 4, a real man is not an abuser. Let me be direct and clear about this. There is no version of manhood, no cultural tradition, no religious misinterpretation, no personal history or upbringing that justifies a man abusing another human being. No version. None. Abuse is not strength. Abuse is the most visible and undeniable evidence of weakness, of insecurity, of an internal brokenness that has not been addressed and is being projected outward onto the people closest to the man. Abuse takes many forms, and I want to talk about all of them, because too many people have a narrow definition of abuse that only includes physical violence. And while physical violence is absolutely abuse, it is just one expression of a much broader and more widespread problem. There is verbal abuse. The man who uses his words as weapons, who tears down his wife with his tongue, who speaks to his children with contempt, who uses insults and degradation and humiliation as tools of control, who has never lifted a hand but has left wounds in the hearts of his family that are just as deep and just as lasting as any physical scar. Words have power. Proverbs tells us that death and life are in the power of the tongue, and a man who consistently uses his words to bring death to the people in his home is an abuser. Full stop. There is emotional abuse. The man who uses silence as punishment, who withholds affection as a weapon, who gaslights his partner into doubting her own perception of reality, who manipulates through guilt and fear and shame. These things leave marks that are invisible to the outside world, but devastating to the person experiencing them. There is spiritual abuse, using religion as a tool of control, weaponizing scripture to justify domination, hiding behind the word submission to excuse behavior that no honest reading of the Bible would ever endorse. A real man does not abuse. And if you grew up in an environment where abuse was normalized, where you watched a father use his fists or his words or his silence as instruments of control, I understand that what you experienced shaped you deeply, powerfully, in ways you may not even fully realize. But here is the truth that needs to settle in your heart right now. You are not your upbringing. You are not condemned to repeat the patterns of the men who raised you. The same God who created you with purpose also has the power to heal what was broken in you, to renew your mind, and to make you genuinely new. But that healing requires honesty. It requires the humility to say, I have patterns that need to change. I have wounds that need to be addressed. I need help. And seeking that help is not weakness. It is the bravest thing a man can do. Number 5, a real man is a responsible husband and a devoted father. Before you find a wife, prepare to be a husband. Before you have children, prepare to be a father. Because the world is full of men who stumbled into marriage completely unprepared and then stumbled into fatherhood even less prepared. And the cost of that unpreparedness is paid not just by the man himself, but by the woman who chose him and the children who had no choice at all. The Bible says that he who finds a wife finds a good thing. But notice the language carefully. He finds a wife, not a girl, not a woman. A wife, which means before she can be found, she must have become a wife. She must have developed herself into someone who is ready for that role. But here is the part we often miss. The same principle applies to the man. Before he can find a wife, he must have become a husband. He must have prepared himself. He must have done the work of developing his character, his emotional maturity, his financial responsibility, his spiritual depth, to the point where he is actually ready to receive what he is asking for. What does it mean to be a husband? It means to groom. The word bridegroom literally contains the idea of grooming, of developing, of cultivating. A husband is someone who takes the woman who comes into his life and creates the conditions in which she flourishes, in which she grows, in which the best of who she is has the space and the safety and the support to emerge fully. When a woman leaves her father's house and enters her husband's house, she should gradually become more confident, more joyful, more secure, more fully herself. If she is becoming less, something is wrong. If she is shrinking instead of expanding, if she is dimming instead of brightening, if she is disappearing instead of blooming, the environment the husband has created is not one of cultivation. It is one of suppression, and that is a failure of stewardship. And then there is fatherhood, one of the most sacred and most consequential roles any man will ever fill. The research is overwhelming and consistent on this point. The presence or absence of a father, and the quality of that presence, is one of the single greatest determining factors in the outcomes of children. Children who grow up with an involved, loving, intentional father are statistically more likely to succeed academically, emotionally, relationally, and professionally. They are more likely to make healthy choices, to build stable relationships, to have a strong sense of identity and purpose. And children who grow up without that, or with a father who was physically present but emotionally absent, carry that wound into every area of their lives. A real man does not just provide financially for his children and consider his job done. Financial provision is important, but a child needs more than money from their father. They need his time, his attention, his wisdom, his affection, his presence at the dinner table and at the school play and at the bedside when nightmares come. They need to hear his voice saying, I am proud of you. They need to feel his arms around them saying you are safe. They need to see the way he treats their mother and learn from it what love and respect look like in real life. Because children do not primarily learn from what their fathers say. They learn from what their fathers do every single day. Number 6, a real man is emotionally mature. This is perhaps one of the most desperately needed and most consistently avoided conversations in the space of male development, because we have raised generation after generation of men who were taught, explicitly or implicitly, that emotions are dangerous, that vulnerability is weakness, that the appropriate response to pain, fear, grief, confusion, or overwhelm is to push it down, lock it away, and present a face to the world that shows nothing, that reveals nothing, that asks for nothing. And we have produced a generation of men who are walking around with enormous unprocessed pain behind perfectly constructed walls. Men who cannot tell their wives what they are actually feeling. Men who cannot admit to their children that they are struggling. Men who are isolated in their suffering because they have been told their whole lives that isolation is strength and asking for help is failure. And that pain does not disappear because it is suppressed. It finds other ways out. It comes out as anger, as withdrawal, as addiction, as the kind of explosive reaction to a small trigger that leaves everyone around the man confused and hurt because they could not see the mountain of unaddressed pain that had been building behind the dam for years. Emotional maturity does not mean that a man cries at everything or that he is ruled by his feelings. It means that he knows what he is feeling, that he can name it accurately and honestly, that he can communicate it in ways that build connection rather than destroy it, that he can regulate his emotional responses so that he is choosing how to act rather than simply being swept away by how he feels in the moment. It means he can receive criticism without collapsing or exploding. He can sit with discomfort without immediately numbing it. He can be wrong and admit it without his sense of self being shattered by the admission. Emotional maturity is what allows a man to be genuinely present in his relationships, because a man who cannot feel cannot truly connect. And connection is the oxygen of every intimate relationship. Without it, even a marriage between two people who started out deeply in love will slowly suffocate. Real men feel, and real men are brave enough to deal with what they feel honestly rather than running from it. Number 7, a real man is a provider and a protector. Provision and protection are not just cultural expectations placed on men. They are woven into the very design of manhood. They are part of the original assignment. When God placed man in the garden, he was given the responsibility to tend it and to keep it, to cultivate and to guard, to develop what was in his care and to protect it from what threatened it. And this assignment did not end when humanity left the garden. It has simply taken different forms across different generations and different contexts. Provision is not just about money. Although financial stewardship is absolutely part of a man's responsibility, and any man who is capable of working and providing for his family but refuses to do so needs to examine himself seriously. Provision is also about emotional security, about creating an environment in which the people in your care feel seen, valued, nurtured, and safe. A man who brings home a salary but brings no warmth, no engagement, no emotional investment into his home is only partially providing. He is meeting one need while leaving others desperately unmet. Protection is equally multidimensional. Yes, a man should be the physical protector of his family. But in the modern world, the threats that families face most often are not physical. They are spiritual, emotional, psychological, and relational. A man who protects his family is one who guards the spiritual atmosphere of his home, who is intentional about the values and the culture that are being cultivated under his roof, who pays attention to the influences coming into his home through screens, through friendships, through the ideas his children are being exposed to, who stands as a filter and a guardian not out of control, but out of genuine love and genuine responsibility. A man who provides and protects well is a man whose family sleeps soundly at night, not just because there are locks on the doors, but because they know that someone is standing watch, someone is paying attention, someone cares enough about their well-being to sacrifice his own comfort in service of their safety and their flourishing. Number 8, a real man takes responsibility. Nothing reveals the true character of a man faster than how he responds when things go wrong, when a mistake is made, when a plan fails, when someone is hurt by his actions, when the consequences of his choices arrive at his door, demanding to be acknowledged. In that moment, every man faces a fork in the road. One path leads to blame, deflection, excuse-making, and the desperate attempt to protect his ego at the expense of truth and relationship. The other path leads to ownership, to accountability, to the humbling, courageous act of saying, I was wrong. I made a mistake. I take responsibility, and I am going to do what it takes to make it right. Real men take the second path, every time, not because they are perfect or because they never make mistakes, but because they have developed the character to face their mistakes honestly rather than hiding from them. Adam's first response when confronted by God was to blame. He said, "The woman you gave me, she gave me the fruit, and I ate." One of the first acts of fallen masculinity in human history was blame shifting. And we have been dealing with the consequences of that pattern ever since. Men who will not own their failures, who always have a reason, an excuse, a person to point to, who have built entire psychological architectures designed to protect their ego from the discomfort of genuine accountability. A man who takes responsibility is trustworthy because you know that when he says something, you can hold him to it. When he makes a commitment, you can count on it. When he makes a mistake, you can trust that he will acknowledge it and address it rather than pretending it never happened. And that quality, that consistent, demonstrated trustworthiness, is the foundation on which everything meaningful in a man's life is built. His relationships, his reputation, his legacy. All of it rests on whether or not he is a man who can be taken at his word. A man whose yes means yes and whose no means no. A man who shows up when he said he would show up and delivers what he said he would deliver. Not because conditions are perfect, but because he is a man of his word. Number 9. A real man is a man of integrity. Integrity means wholeness. It means that you are the same person in private that you are in public. That what you present to the world and what actually exists behind closed doors are not two different things. That your values are not just words you speak, but principles you live by, even when nobody's watching, even when there is no audience, even when keeping your integrity costs you something. We live in a world that has become increasingly comfortable with the separation of public image and private character, where a man can present one face to the world and live a completely contradictory life behind it, where a man can preach virtue on a Sunday and practice vice on a Monday, where a man can talk about love and commitment in one room and betray everything those words mean in the next. And we have come to accept this as normal, as just the way things are, as something inevitable in flawed human beings. But integrity is not just idealistic, it is practical. It is the foundation of genuine influence. Because people sense inconsistency even when they cannot name it. They feel the gap between what a man says and what a man does. And over time, that gap destroys trust. And without trust, a man has no real relationship, no real leadership, no real legacy. He has only a performance. And performances eventually end. A man of integrity is a man whose family trusts him, whose children can believe what he tells them, whose wife does not need to wonder who he really is, because who he is the same everywhere and in every season. And that kind of trustworthiness, that rock-solid consistency of character, is one of the most powerful gifts a man can give to the people he loves. It creates a security in them that no amount of money or status or external success can buy. It gives them a foundation on which they can build their own lives with confidence, because they have seen what it looks like to be a person of genuine integrity, and they know it is possible. Watch their father live it every day. Number 10. A real man never stops growing. This is where we land, and it is perhaps the most important characteristic of all, because it is the one that makes all the others possible and sustainable. A real man is a man who has made a permanent, unshakable commitment to growth, to learning, to becoming. Not because he is not enough right now, but because he understands that the man he is today is just the beginning of the man he is capable of becoming, and that the moment he stops growing is the moment he starts dying. Not physically, but in terms of his capacity to lead, to love, to serve, to impact, and to fulfill the purpose for which he was placed on this earth. We invest years and resources into developing our professional skills. We read books and attend seminars and watch tutorials and seek out mentors in our careers and our businesses. We understand intuitively that the world changes and that if we do not keep learning, we will be left behind. And yet so many men approach their personal character, their relationships, their emotional development, and their spiritual growth with a completely different attitude. An attitude that says, I already know enough. I am already good enough. I do not need to keep working on this. And that attitude is one of the most dangerous things a man can carry. The greatest men in Scripture were lifelong learners. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness being prepared before he was ready to lead. David spent years as a shepherd, as a fugitive, as a warrior, being shaped and refined by every experience before he was ready to be king. Paul, after his dramatic encounter on the road to Damascus, spent years in quiet preparation before he stepped fully into his calling. God does not waste seasons. He uses every one of them to develop something in you that you will need later. But only if you are teachable, only if you maintain the posture of a student rather than the posture of someone who has already arrived. A man who never stops growing is a man who reads, not just in his professional field, but in every area that matters. He reads about relationships and emotional intelligence and parenting and leadership and faith and history and human nature. He understands that wisdom does not come automatically with age. It comes with intentional pursuit. It comes from the willingness to sit at the feet of people who have walked further than you and learn from what they carry. A man who never stops growing is a man who seeks counsel, who has the humility to say, I do not have all the answers, who has mentors in his life who are not afraid to tell him the truth, who has a community of other growing men around him who sharpen him and challenge him and hold him accountable, because iron sharpens iron. And a man who tries to grow in total isolation will only ever sharpen himself to a certain point. There is a ceiling to solo development. Growth in community breaks through that ceiling. A man who never stops growing is a man who is always getting better at being a husband, always getting better at being a father, always finding new ways to serve his family, to lead his community, to develop his gifts, to deepen his relationship with God. He is not the same man at 50 that he was at 25. Not just physically, but in every dimension of character and wisdom and depth. And the people around him can feel the difference. They are the beneficiaries of every year he invested in becoming more. So let me bring this home. 10 characteristics. A real man is a God lover. A real man is a visionary. A real man understands and honors the equal worth of women. A real man is not an abuser. A real man is a responsible husband and a devoted father. A real man is emotionally mature. A real man provides and protects. A real man takes responsibility. A real man lives with integrity. And a real man never stops growing. Now look at that list honestly, not with shame, not with the kind of brutal self-condemnation that paralyzes rather than motivates, but with honest, clear-eyed assessment. Because the goal of this conversation was never to condemn you. The goal was to show you the target, to give you a clear picture of what genuine manhood looks like so that you know what you are aiming for, so that you can measure yourself against something real and true rather than against the distorted and damaging images of manhood that the world keeps pushing. Because here is what I need you to understand. You were made for this. Every single characteristic we have talked about today is not some impossible standard reserved for exceptional men. These are the characteristics of the man God had in mind when he made you. These are the traits that are available to every man who is willing to do the work, who is willing to humble himself enough to grow, who is willing to make the daily choice, not just once, but again and again, to be the man he was created to be, rather than settling for a lesser version of himself. The world needs real men, not men who are perfect, not men who have it all figured out, not men who have never made mistakes or never struggled or never fallen short, but men who are genuinely, authentically committed to the pursuit of real manhood, men who are standing up in their homes and taking responsibility, men who are loving God without apology and without shame, men who are leading with humility and serving with strength, men who are raising children with intention and investing in their marriages with the same energy they pour into their careers, men who are growing consistently and persistently into the fullness of everything they were made to be. That man is needed in your home. He is needed in your community. He is needed in this generation. And that man, in all his imperfect, growing, striving, trying, getting back up when he falls glory, that man is you. if you choose it, every single day, for the rest of your life. Where are you? That is the question God asked in the garden, and it is the question every man must answer for himself. Not where are you hiding, but where are you standing? Where are you showing up? Where are you becoming? Start today. Start right now. The world is waiting for you to show up as the man you were always made to be.